Welcome to Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston, PhD. Glenn has held his doctorate in psychology for more than 30 years and is also a former multi-million-dollar consultant to the big food industry and uses his experience to help you defeat your cravings. This show will help you to focus on dramatically reducing cravings and leave the diet mentality behind, so you can more easily and effortlessly achieve your health, fitness, and body composition goals. Please remember, no doctor-patient relationship is created via this show, and you are responsible for confirming any changes to your diet, health, or psychological routines with an appropriately licensed professional before implementing them. Now, before we get started, if you haven't yet downloaded the free smartphone app to access dozens of these recordings all in one place, as well as to avail yourself of a confidential community for support, motivation, and assistance, please visit the podcast link on defeatyourcravings.com as soon as possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Hey, it's the very good Dr. Glenn Livingston with defeatyourcravings.com. And I am here with
Howie Jacobson, doctor, but not that kind of doctor. Howie Jacobson of AskHowie.com.
I'm not that kind of doctor either. People are probably wondering what kind of doctors aren't they? Well, neither of us are doctors of zoology, nor proctology, nor all kinds of doctors that we're not. My PhD is in psychology and yours is in education, right?
Health education, yes.
Health education.
I had to remember.
So I wanted to ask you something about something I think you wrote it in your book, Sick to Fit. I think you wrote it in that book a long time ago, about the concept of benign masochism. Like, my understanding is it has to do with embracing short-term pain for long-term gains. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about it and how your thoughts about it might have evolved over the years. And we just have a little discussion about where that fits in evolving and self-actualizing and growing.
Sure. So I got the phrase from Dan Ariely, who's a behavioral economist, and I guess he's most famous for his book, Predictably Irrational, in which he just looks at all the ways that, as an economist, humans were thought to be rational. Like, we're going to make market decisions to maximize our utility, and he's like, no, that's not how humans work at all. And we can see this because, markets aren't rational. People do things all the time that appear to be against their self-interest. And he's interested in exploring, what are the heuristics that get us to behave in ways other than a computer program would predict that we would behave if we wanted to just have the most happiest lives possible. So he was looking at people who did things like CrossFit and triathletes and people who kind of gathered together in community and bragged about how much things hurt. It doesn't make sense, first of all, to be in that kind of community. Why would you want that kind of peer pressure? And second, it doesn't make any sense to want to chase things that hurt. When he put the two of them together, he realized people aren't bragging about things like cutting their hands off, or poisoning themselves, but it was all things that were painful in the moment, but were leading to greater happiness later on. And then he said, but that doesn't make sense either, because there's a concept in behavioral economics called future discounting or present bias, which is, and you know well about this, that eating the healthy meal now, as opposed to getting some delicious junky food, makes me feel sad, but I'd be happier in 2 weeks or 2 months when I look at the scale or I pull off my shirt at the beach.
But people are very bad at predicting what's going to happen 2 weeks or a month down the road. Yeah.
Well, yeah, we can't even visualize. So we discount it. So giving up the chocolate now feels much more onerous than the benefit down the road. So he's like, well, this doesn't make sense that these people would willingly suffer now for future benefits. So what's going on in these communities? And what he said was, they have turned the suffering into pleasure, which is why it's called masochism as opposed to suffering, right? Because masochism, you're the psychologist, so you understand kind of links between...
There's a bit of a perverted pleasure associated with it, yeah.
Yeah, so link between pleasure and pain, and that pain can, at certain levels, trigger... I don't quite understand it from a neurological or psychological perspective, but it's not important. It's the idea that when you wrap your mind around certain kinds of voluntary pain, that you can actually get pleasure from it in the moment. So you don't have to rely on the thing I'm doing now is so great for me that I'm willing to suffer.
You don't have to rely on this long-term rational understanding of what it's doing for you. You
Yeah,
can get pleasure from the pain in the moment.
right, right. So that the pain itself, the greater the sacrifice. So, and you can hear it in the way people talk about it. It was almost like when I was working with health clients, a switch would flip and they would say, well, I guess I got to go eat the salad now. It's like, boy, I am going to murder this boring salad right now. That, that it became an identity shift. And that's kind of how I understood and wrote about benign masochism.
Mm-hmm. And in working with your clients over the years, have you found that there are any tweaks to how you understand it or to help people? Because you want to be able to embrace that without allowing it to become pernicious, right? Like anorexics allow that to become pernicious. There are forms of masochism where you could really hurt yourself, yet it is a process where if you can learn to get some pleasure from the pain. The easiest form of it that I'm aware of in working with clients is that people that overcome binge eating at some level always have to learn how to enjoy their hunger. It becomes a sign of mastery. They actually come to like that feeling inside. It gives them a sense of freedom and energy. It can be taken too far.
Yeah, and that's something that has taken a while for me to appreciate. It was such a powerful concept up front, and I wasn't prepared for the various long-term negative consequences of over-reliance on it. As you're talking, I'm picturing three of them. One is there's peer pressure. So I injured my right foot in January of 2019. It was really cold out. And I was running laps with this group called F3, like Fitness, Friends, Faith, something like that. And, it was a pretty intense group. We'd get up at 5:30 in the morning and one person would lead the workout. It was really cold. So I was wearing 2 pairs of socks and that kind of compressed my foot. And I wasn't paying attention to the pain signals because everyone's like, yeah, you got it, you got it. We're running in circles around this monument in my town. And by the time I had finished, really caught up in the peer pressure of, man, this sucks so bad. Like, we wake up at 5:30 in the morning and suffer so that we can be strong. And my foot still hurts to this day, going up and down stairs, running on certain surfaces. It's called a Morton's neuroma. And, short of surgery, and even that.
You went too far. Yeah.
Went too far because I got caught up in the culture, because human beings do a lot to belong. And if you're in a culture of benign masochism where everybody's doing it, it can build on itself to the point where, like this group, we were doing like buddy carries. Oh, I'm buddied with a guy who weighs 240 pounds. All right, let's totally ignore everything I know about spinal health and just, hoist this guy. And
Right.
It was idiotic. The second thing is that we can just overdo it on our own because now we can code pain as a go-ahead signal. So there's certain types of suffering, and my friend Josh Lajani would talk all the time about the difference between discomfort and damage. But a lot of people, it's a subtle discernment. And like myself, I didn't realize it. And so we can go overboard if we let go.
But how do you find the line? Where is the line between discomfort and damage?
I think the line has to be in healthy awareness. It's almost like if you're driving, where's the line between hitting the curb and veering into the other oncoming traffic lane? Nobody can tell you that except when you're driving. It's like, you know what? Maybe don't be texting. Maybe don't be drunk. Maybe have good windshield wiper blades on.
Right. And you're not terrified gripping the wheel, staring at the line, but you have a sense of it in your periphery. And there's a generally heightened level of awareness as you're going through that.
And when I started driving, I didn't have that. I would overcorrect. My father would sweat bullets next to me as I was trying to figure out how to not oversteer.
When I learned how to drive I spent summers in Charleston, South Carolina when I was 16, 17 years old. And my dad taught me how to drive on these very dark roads in rainstorms. My dad didn't give me very many driving lessons. One day he took me out and made me drive backwards around the whole neighborhood, which was great. It was freaking awesome because now I'm very comfortable driving backwards and backing into spots and stuff. This was before we had those cameras and beeping systems to stop you from hitting stuff. And he told me to watch the line in my peripheral vision. There's a white line on the side of the road that's painted so you know you're not going to go off the road. He said, just glance at it from time to time. And I've always been comfortable driving in the rainstorms in the dark if I have to because of that. So I guess that's what you want to do. You want to know that if you're entering the realm where you're embracing a little bit of pain, enjoying your hunger, working out hard, that you know there's a heightened level of awareness that's required. But don't freak out about it. Just watch it in your periphery and don't drive off the road.
Yeah, that reminds me of the third danger here, whereas the benign masochism becomes your identity. And so now it's an ego thing, right? So now it's like, oh, watch me drive backwards at 40 miles an hour through the neighborhood because I'm really good at this.
Right.
Like you're not driving backwards to impress yourself or to have an identity. You're driving backwards to get into a parallel parking spot or backing up in a driveway, like. So for a lot of people, because their previous identity was so harmful to them, I'm the party guy, I'm the life of the party, I'm the big fat guy. My previous identity was like, I just need comfort. Like, don't come near me with that water pistol because I might get wet. So I dove into benign masochism and doing ice baths every morning for 6 years. And every morning I'd get up and I'd pour the thing, and that's something that clearly was not harmful. It was, so short-term cold exposure is a great perception of terrible pain, but not actually.
Mm-hmm. What did it do for you? How did that benefit you?
So there's all sorts of like physiological and immune benefits that I can't really speak to. I mean, I read studies, but there's not a lot of research on that because there weren't that many people doing it
Not that many people are willing to do it. Participate in a research study where you pour ice cold water on yourself every morning. Yeah.
In fact, most psychological studies of willpower and pain use ice water.
Mm-hmm. I know an interesting one I'll tell you about afterwards. But,
okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Poor listeners aren't going to hear about it.
The one that I know, they were trying to see could people tolerate pain longer if they cursed. They had a big bucket of ice water and people had to stick their hand in it, and experimenters are sickos. So people had to stick their hand in the ice water. And in one scenario, the control group, they weren't allowed to curse. They just had to keep it there as long as they could. In the other scenario, they could say fudge and sugar and things like that. In the third scenario, they could say the real curse words. I'm not going to say it on our podcast. And it turns out that only the real curse words help people to tolerate pain for longer. I think as much as like 42% longer, if I remember correctly. And it actually led me to tell some clients that when you're really enduring a craving and it feels like torture and you can't do it, go in your car and scream curse words. Scream the F word as loud as you can, and you'll get through it. You'll see. And it works. It helps. So
yeah, especially if they have a craving for fudge, they should use the real word.
Yeah, effing fudge. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're asking like what it did for me. It basically gave me a feeling like I can do hard things and a meta feeling of having a growth mindset. I was in my 50s when I started doing this. Like you could say like I'm pretty set in my ways at that point. To be able to witness the change, and I wasn't doing it publicly, but every so often Mia would come out and film it. I'd have to wear pants, and she'd put it on, Facebook.
I didn't realize you were doing this naked. Thank you for the visual. Okay, go
ahead. Well, it's much easier naked than walking inside with dripping.
That makes total sense. Okay, so you were outside naked, pouring cold water. Did you have neighbors that complained about these things?
Well, we moved to a farm in Pittsburgh, so my nearest neighbors were cows, and they didn't care. They were naked all the time.
Okay.
Right? But it became, and even these dribs and drabs of public acknowledgement, or even Mia or the kids knowing that I was doing it, started seeing me as a different person.
Most everything we want to achieve or self-actualize is on the other side of something hard. I understand how that makes you feel like you could do hard things and it would force you to grow in all kinds of other ways.
Then it started becoming an identity. And I would do it when I was sick, or I would do it, my back would hurt. And I'm still, no, I've got to lift 5-gallon bucket of water is heavy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't only tolerating the cold, it was the physical exertion of...
Yeah, if my back was hurting. And then, of course, the cold would constrict the muscles, which if I was already close to spasm, wasn't smart. At this point, I was also in the ultra running community. And so we would brag about, oh, I did 60 miles this week, or I ran a 5-hour hard run in the morning and I woke up at 2 in the morning so I could finish before the sun came up, I was hurting myself. I wasn't having fun, but now I was hiding behind this carapace of tough guy, look at me, be impressed. One of the things that happened, aside from this injury, was moving to Spain. Everything was up in the air. It's like, who do I want to be now? So I work out hard twice a week. I play ultimate for 2.5 hours on the sand, which is a really hard workout, once a week. And then I go for walks, or I'll jog, or I'll swim, or I'll do some stretching. And there's part of me that's like, you lazy bum, look what you've become. I feel good. I haven't gained a ton of weight. I'm better off, but there is this ego part that is terrified that I'm going to go back to exactly where I was beforehand.
Like CrossFit was a chapter of my life. I got stronger. I figured out I could do things that I never thought I could do. I could stand on my hands. I could jump up on a big box. I could squat a lot more weight than I ever thought I could squat. But eventually I became the middle-aged guy in the room trying not to get hurt with a bunch of 20 and 30-year-olds who said, pick up a heavier weight. You could swing a heavier dumbbell. So I just now figured that was a chapter of my life. It made me stronger. It got me ready to do hot yoga. It got me ready to do some of the other things that I do, but it's too much masochism for me at this point in my life.
And for myself, I had the benefit of seeing clients who had adopted this benign masochism and then they burned out. They would get injured, like too bad, or it was just too much, and they had nothing to fall back on except for the masochism. When that was gone, they went right back to where they had been. They put all their eggs in this tough person identity basket.
What have you replaced it with?
Well, I think it's good fuel for the metaphor of the rocket leaving the atmosphere. But I think you really need to quickly replace it with more self-care, with more questioning, like what's good for me? How long-term is this? Talking to other people and really exploring, like the way you eat, other people would look at it and go, that must be horrible. And for you, I'm guessing there's tremendous pleasure in that watermelon that I see in your background.
There is. Yeah, I'm actually transitioning back to eating raw diet. Usually my table has 8 or 9 watermelons on it this time of year. Yeah, it's a normal table right now. I am kind of embracing a masochism in making the transition back to raw. I was raw for like a year and a half with some little breaks around 2016. For various reasons, I decided to go to cooked whole foods, plant-based. And I did that for about 6 years. But I've got some health issues I'm trying to address with the raw diet, which seemed to work. But it's a hard transition back, so I have to embrace the masochism. It's probably why I was thinking about this in the first place. This is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and another insight comes from Judd Brewer. He's written a lot about like mindfulness and changing habits. And as quickly as possible, I want to replace the masochism with the truth, which is like squatting heavy weights, if they're the right weight, feels really good. I was doing my workout this morning. I was doing pistol squats, one-legged pistol squats off the bench. I do sets of 12, one each foot. And by the time I get to 6 on my right leg, it starts burning and screaming and the quadricep. And I'm like, oh, it hurts. But when I slow down, like it's not the same as pain. It's something different. It's not exactly the same. It's an intense sensation. And if I pay attention, I can go, this feels really good. Right now, doing it too much, and then I start feeling like, oh, my hip is compromised, or my knee or my ankle feel bad. But if I'm just focusing on the muscle, if I let go of the masochism frame, I can be like, when I was doing bands for reverse flies, and like, oh, it's burning, it's good. This feels good. It's a sensation.
How old are you, Howie?
I will be 59 in 4 days.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I'm a year older than you. Yeah. You're in fabulous shape. You're doing great. You're doing terrific things for our age. Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Yeah, I wear black and medium now. It really helps.
I should be wearing black on video also, but whatever. I'm a 60-year-old guy. It works out okay. Nice. Thanks. Is there anything else that I missed that I should have asked you about the concept to use it without abusing it?
Everything comes down to context. I would encourage people to just sort of notice when it's useful, when it's not. And ultimately, I think the goal of life is not self-improvement, although we may need self-improvement or evolution in order to be our fullest selves. I think when that becomes the prime directive,
But when it becomes the major part of your identity that you can embrace the pain better than other people. I remember talking to an anorexic woman, a previous anorexic woman, who told me that what really scared her was when she would hear about someone eating 500 calories a day and she'd say, oh yeah, I can eat 300 calories a day. That's nothing. I can eat 300 calories a day. So if you start having a comparative identity like that, it becomes a performance metric and you're not really relying on anything else to feel good about yourself, then you're in trouble.
Yeah. And when you say the word comparison, I immediately go to social media, which has put the opportunity to be in front of people who make this their identity. Some of the most popular influencers in the world are about do hard things. And of course, there's truth to it. And people who are doing no hard things can definitely benefit. But it's easy to get caught up in, first of all, that the idea that these people are actually healthy and happy. They may not be. They may be sick, miserable, broke, no redeeming relationships, but they've got to keep feeding the machine.
I want to say one last thing about hard things, which is helpful for overeaters. And this is in favor of some level of benign masochism, because our food monsters usually hammer home the point that there's got to be an easy way. Life should be a pain-free experience, and this is too hard. Not going back for seconds, it's too hard. Eating 7 servings of fruits and vegetables every day, it's too hard. Getting to the gym every morning, it's too hard. And the truth is, in most cases, there are 2 hard ways. There's the hard way of overindulging your impulses, which in the modern food environment is disastrous for your health in the long run. And it's going to be much harder to deal with the effects of heart attacks or strokes or cancer or kidney disease or disability or all the various diet reversible or diet preventable diseases, disorders, and conditions that can result if you don't take care of yourself. Or there's a shorter term hard of, experiencing some pain as you go through the extinction curves, as you stop reinforcing some of these neurological grooves that are leading you to trouble. Your brain will cry out. It's going to be uncomfortable for usually a month or 2 at the most. And so choose your hard. There's usually no easy way. Choose your hard. And I like to think that we've worked with thousands of people and figured out how to make it as easy as possible, but it's still a mountain to climb. It's a very well-worn and proven path up the mountain. You still got to put one foot in front of the other. You're still going to huff and puff a little bit. It's going to be a little uncomfortable. And you're going to have to embrace that on some level. So this concept of benign masochism in the right doses is extraordinarily helpful.
Yes, I still agree with that. There's a membrane of comfort that we need to break. And benign masochism is a good tool for that.
Okay.
And that brings us to the end of today's broadcast of Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston. Now, if you'd like to find out more about the products and services Dr. Glenn offers to help you dramatically reduce your cravings and stop overeating in 90 days or less, please visit defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. That's defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. Thanks.